So originally this was a collection of 5 videos. The first and the third videos in the series use the GitHub Jobs API. And one of the limitations to APIs is because we're using a service that's offered by some organization. They may change how the service works, or they may just discontinue it entirely, in which case your application breaks. So that actually happened with the GitHub Jobs API, that it was discontinued. So I had to replace it. So instead of using the GitHub Jobs API, we're going to be using an API called the Dictionary API, which is over here called Dictionary. It's on the website dictionaryapi.dev, and it's fairly simple. We've got a specific endpoint, which allows us to look up inside of a specific language some word. For example, if we wanted to look up the word hello, we would just use this endpoint, and then we would change the string over here to be any word that we want. Okay. The output that it gives us, which I have open already, is going to be a JSON results. Okay, so JSON itself is the web's interchange format. There's not that much we need to know about it inside of JavaScript, because there's most languages provide some support to translate a JSON into a object, including JavaScript. And so all we really need to do is to know that this is a sort of interchange format that allows different servers and clients to communicate, to transfer data to each other without knowing the specific language that the client or the server is using. For example, let's say a Python client should be able to interact with a Node.js server, and if they use JSON to exchange data, then they don't really need to worry about each other. Okay, so JSON is just a format that's used to exchange data on the web. It's called an interchange format. And so in this case, we can see that's the data that we get back. We can look at the raw data if we want, but it's really messy usually. This pretty print can help us a little bit. You can see that essentially it's an array of objects, and the JSON viewer is probably decent as well. So it's an array of objects, and looks like we have multiple meanings. So we have the word followed by meanings. And what I'll do in this demo case, so we might have homonyms or something. Maybe we have the word bat or something that has multiple definitions. Okay, so bat has 3 definitions over here. Doctor only has, looks like it has 1 core definition, and then over here we have a couple of meanings. But I'll just print out the very first one inside of our demo. Okay, so we'll try to print out this: a person is qualified to treat people who are ill. And once we get that cleared up, we can, let's see. Well, first we have to sort of establish the server. Okay, so to establish the server, we're going to need the library that we're going to be using to establish our own servers is the HTTP library. We technically could use the HTTPS library, but that requires us to set up certificates, which is not that complicated, but I want to keep the code as simple as possible. So one way to do that is to just use HTTP for our server, which means that this is the insecure version, but it doesn't really matter since we're testing locally anyways. So why do we need both HTTP and HTTPS? Well, most APIs that you'll use on the web, they have a HTTPS as they use HTTPS. And so if we want to communicate with this API, okay, if we want to communicate with this API, and it's using HTTPS, then we need to have HTTPS over here. So this is essentially for hosting our own server, and this one's going to be for requesting data from the API. Okay, so we load up our server. Okay, so create http.create server will create a server. We attach two listeners to it. One to just to print a message when we start listening. Now listening on port, in this case 3000, and then the request handler, which will handle new requests received from clients. Okay, so when a client sends a HTTP request to our server, the request handler will fire. Okay, so we'll print out the URL that was requested, and then we do a bit of basic routing. In this case, we have 3 pages. We have the root, we have the search endpoint, and we have everything else, which goes to a 404. So we can just focus on these 2 for now. Okay, so if we go to the roots of the sites, we're going to open up the index file, and we're going to pipe that to the user. Okay, so the index file over here, let's see. Okay, so this index file over here is just a form for the user to fill out that sends data via GET to the endpoint search. Okay, so essentially we are sending, in this case, the data that we have. We have one input over here that has the name word. So essentially we're sending out, we're sending to the endpoint search the data word equals whatever they type in. So if they type in something like hello, it's word equals hello. That gets caught on this endpoint. Okay, once they fill it out. Let's finish this though. So this creates that stream, so it opens it, and then because response is a stream, we can use form.pipe response to forward the file data to the client. On the search endpoint, okay, let's see. Okay, so this is when we, so the person is going to fill out this form. In fact, let me open it up. Okay, so they're going to fill out this form. They're going to hit the submit query. So notice that this is got like a file over here. So this is not set up on my server, so it doesn't work right now because I didn't launch the server yet. I'm just looking at the HTML code itself. So the person's going to type in some word over here. They're going to submit the query, and then my server is going to respond back with the definition. So that's the goal of the program. So this data is going to get caught over here, and then we need to extract out the user search parameters. And this is where the code in the next demo might be slightly different. In the next demo, in the second demo, I recall using the parse function. The specific way that I did it in the past is now deprecated. The way that you're recommended to do it is to use this is to create this URL object, and to create the URL object, you provide it the request.url, which essentially is this component /search, and then it has the data attached to it, and then followed by the host name. So the request.url doesn't contain the host information, so it doesn't contain the protocol, it doesn't contain the website information. All it contains is like the slash and then the data after that. Okay, so the file name, the ports and stuff, and the search parameters. So it doesn't contain the host information, it doesn't contain the protocol information, so we have to attach that back. So that we can put inside the second parameter to this URL object. And then once we have this URL object contains so this URL object contains a bunch of properties. So we can, if we want to look at like the hash value, the host name, the path, The one that we want is called URL.searchParams. And URL.searchParams, in this case, it's the type itself that they call it is URL search params, which is not that useful, but a better way to think about it is that this is just essentially a hash map of all the inputs that the person filled out. Okay, so it's a hash map. And so the thing about hash maps is that they always have a get and a set function. Okay, so we're going to be using the get function to extract out what the person typed in. So this, okay, so this is the URL. This is the hash map of what the person types in. I'm going to call that user parameters. And I'll just print it out over here just to sort of show you. And then if I want to extract out something that they typed in, I'm going to use user input.get followed by, in this case, the key is going to be the form inputs. Okay, so the form input over here, we used the string word. So I'm going to match that by using user input.getWord. If there was multiple pieces of information that I want to extract out, I would do it in the same fashion, user input.get followed by a string of what the key is supposed to be. Okay, so that's going to be the word. I'm just going to double check to make sure that it's not null. With hash maps, if it's not there, it returns null. And I'm also going to double check that it's not the empty string. So that this is if the person just submits blank, and this is if the person navigates to the search endpoint without going through the form. Okay, so they just type in /search. In either case, I'm going to just send back a message missing inputs as well as send back a 404. Okay, so that's going to be pretty much, that's just error checking. On if there's no errors, okay, so that means that word is some actual value, then we're going to send a request off to the dictionary API. Okay, so essentially we're using this endpoint over here, okay? We're using this endpoint that was specified. Okay, and essentially what we're changing, the only thing we're changing is the word value. And if you wanted to sort of change the language, you could do that as well, but we'll just stick with US English. So we're changing this word value into the word that the person typed in. When you're making the request, essentially you need you have 3 components. Okay, in fact, you can minimize this if you're using the https.get function. We're using https.request, which means that we actually have to manually call this end function because it doesn't know if it's a get request or a post request. And for get request, this is fine. For post request, typically you need to put some data in the body. So usually if there's a post request, post data goes inside of here. Okay, but because this is a get requests typically don't have data in the body. The data itself is typically embedded in the URL, which we have over here, in this case the word. So we need 3 components. Okay, so we need to declare the requests, which we have over here. Then we need to set up the listener. Okay, so when the request itself is finished, we're going to have a response. Okay, that response is contain a stream. Okay, so over here I call it a dictionary res, but this is essentially a stream. The official input type is called incoming message, but it's essentially a stream with a couple of additional parameters. Okay, so because it's a stream, I have this function over here that essentially converts streams to variables. Okay, and how this function works essentially is we start off with an empty string, and then every time we get a data event from the stream, we attach that chunk of data to the body. Okay, so essentially we're just gluing it back together. When there's no more data, we get an end event, in which case I execute a function that calls the specified callback, supplying it the body data that was provided, as well as any arguments that were passed in get forwarded to the next function. So essentially over here, what I'm saying is take that stream. Okay, so when I get a response, take that stream. Okay, so remember when you get a response, you get a stream. In fact, I guess I don't really need these parentheses. Okay, take that stream and then call process stream. Okay, and what will process stream do? Well, it's going to essentially convert the stream into a variable, and then it's going to pass that variable into the function parse results. Okay, so it's the first one is the stream. Okay, the second one is the callback. Okay, which is parse results, and then the rest over here in this case is just response. But in other cases there might be more parameters that you want to pass forward. Okay, so this function over here, this is a higher order function. It's a function that essentially takes in a function as one of its parameters, and in this case it's going to call that function. So just again, because this is a bit high level, I'm going to just repeat it once again. So the function, okay, that's going to execute over here is that when we get back a response, okay, so we're sending in a request out. When we get a response, okay, so there's going to be a response event. That response event, in fact, we can look it up on the node. Okay, so over here we have the incoming message. We need the http.requests. http.requests. Okay, so http.request itself returns back a client request, and a client request should have a let's see, what events do we have here? Request events. We have abort, connect, continue, information, response. Okay, so we get the response event, which says emitted when a response is received to request. This event is only emitted once. Okay, so when we get a response, we'll get a response event. Okay, and this is a let me open that back. So it contains, okay, it contains inside of the response itself, which is a http.incoming message, and this extends stream.readable. Okay, so this is a readable stream. Okay, so this stream, because it's a readable stream, we can listen to data and end events, and that's what this process stream is doing. It takes any stream, okay, and it listens to data events, putting the message into this variable body. Okay, one chunk at a time. When there's no more data, we get an end event, and then what happens is that this function, parse results, is going to be called. I'm going to pass in the body that I reassembled, the message body, as well as any additional parameters that I want to forward to the next stage of the execution. In this case, I want to forward the response, that way I can send data back to the user. Okay, so what does parse results do? So at this point, I have the message, the whole message. That message may be very large. Again, streams break up messages into chunks of 65 kilobytes. If we had a very large message, we would need to reassemble it, and that's what the process stream does. So this is essentially the reassembled object, but we haven't parsed it. Okay, so this is essentially this, but it's not interpreted as a JSON file right now. Right now, it's essentially looks like this. It's raw data. So essentially, we want to convert this into something that the program understands, specifically something more like this that it's able to interpret. That's what JSON.parse does. This is the JavaScript function that converts converts a JSON string into a object. The reverse of this is called JSON.stringify, which allows you to convert an object into a JSON string, which you can then send off to some other device or something. So we were given a string, parse it. Now this is called lookup, but this is probably just better represented as the word object. Okay, because it represents essentially this data over here. So after that, we need to send back to the user. Okay, that's why we sort of carried this variable res forward. We carried it from request handler, and we passed it into process stream. And then inside our process stream, it was this args variable, which gets passed to parse results. Okay, so we're essentially passing the variable that we want to use later on forward so that we continue to have access to it. That way we don't have to sort of create globals and stuff, which is bad. In general, it can be very dangerous. Okay, so we have the parse data, and assuming so essentially we assume that there's no results found unless there actually is results. Okay, so default is we assume that there's no results. How this works is this input, if we give it a word that doesn't exist, let's say doctors with a Z, okay, what we get back over here is a object that says title no definitions found. Okay, and if we give it a real word, then we get a array back. But both times we do get results back. It's just if we get our array back, then we know that it was a correct value. If we get back an object, then we're just going to print out no results found. Okay, so initialize results to be no results found, and then if lookup is an array, then we're going to start looking for the definition. Now this syntax over here is this is called a optional chain, and the idea behind it is first I need to this is the piece of data that I want to extract, this definition over here, and so okay, so I know that this element is an array with, in this case, just one element inside of it. Okay, so this lookup is an array. So if I want to access the first element, I'm going to say, give me the 0th element. Okay, and so that is going to open up this essentially. Now inside of here, I have a couple of options, but the one that I want to get is over here, a person who is qualified to treat people who are ill. So I want to get into the message, the meanings element. Okay, so I want to go into the meanings property. So it's going to be lookup sub0 dot meanings. This is an array itself that has 2 elements inside of it. Okay, and again, I'm going to go for the simplest. I'm always just going to choose the 0th one. But if you are, let's say, building something more complex, then you might want to loop through all the results if you want to print out all the definitions or something. Okay, so meanings sub0, and then inside of here, meaning sub0, we have a definitions element. So I'm going to say sub0 dot definitions, and then this turns out to be an array as well. Okay, in which case there are looks like there are 4 definitions for this term. So again, I'm just going to choose the 0th one, and then I'm going to use dot definition. Okay, so the 0th one and then dot definition. So the question is, why do we have all these question marks? And the question marks are used when the data that you're parsing through was not created by you. Okay, so this data itself, in general, hopefully you want to build an API that's uniform. Okay, that always essentially gives you back data back in the same formats. But there's a chance that it doesn't. There's a chance that something breaks or they change the structure or something into something else, and that can cause a lot of problems if they change, let's say, one of the structures over here, or it turns out that my assumption of how this structure works was incorrect. In that, if one of these, let's say the lookup sub0 or something, suddenly returned back something like undefined, okay, then this would cause a null pointer error, that I have something that's essentially null or equivalent to null inside of JavaScript, and then I'm trying to do a dot operation on it, just trying to say null dot meanings. Now, normally, if you're in Java or in your 212 class, you would know that you can't do that. As soon as you say something like that's null, and then you do a dot operation on it, you get a null pointer error. Same thing in JavaScript. You'll get a null pointer error. And this question mark is called the optional chaining operator, and it allows you to sort of skirt that issue. in that essentially if it's null or undefined, essentially the rest of it will not be evaluated and we'll just get back null as the results. That is called the optional chaining operator. Okay, so this is used when essentially the data that you're working with is not created by you. So you can't guarantee that that's going to be valid every time. Okay, so essentially I have this data. I don't know if it's correct every time. It might break my format. I don't want my server to crash because of that. And so I'm going to use question dots. And this will make my server more resilient. And it doesn't really help me though with the answer. The person's probably still going to get a blank answer in this case, but at least my server won't sort of crash because of a null pointer error. Okay, so that's going to be first definition, and then over here I set up the results that I want to print. In this case, I want to print out the word followed by the definition. And in fact, I don't need, let's just use a paragraph tag. Okay, so the results, and then I use res.end to send the results back to whoever is requesting it. Do I have res.writehead here? Yeah, okay, so I have res.writehead over here. So over here I set up the, in fact I think I could just move this down here so to make it more accurate. Res.writehead. Yeah, either one. That one's cleaner. And so from here, let's run this. Oh, do I have a shell of it? Okay, so now we're listing on port 3000. Let's close this. Okay, so we will look up the word doctor. And we get that as our results. We can change this to cat. We can change this to dog. And so it looks fine. Okay. Alright, so a couple things to look at. Okay, so the first thing that prints out is the URL. Okay. That's over here on line 16. Okay. And then, right, favicon.ico prints out because the browser always searches for, makes a request for this. So if you want to, that's typically the image in this top corner over here. So if you supply it that file format, you can get a little corner image to display. Let's see. Okay, so when we do a search for doctor, we can see that we print out, in this case, the user inputs, which in this case we mentioned is a URL search parameter object, which essentially is a map. So you can see that we have essentially the key is word and the value is doctor. So if we want, in this case, if we want to extract out the string doctor or something, then we need to use the hashmap function dot get. Okay, and we supplied the key in this case, which would be word, and then we'll get out doctor or dog or cat. Okay, so I think that's it for this video. Come back in the third video in which we'll look at this plus the USA Jobs demo.